And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America.
All praise, glory, and honor is most certainly due to the Most High Elohim of the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I want to say peace to each and every one of you in the name of His Son, Yahushua HaMashiach, who we know as Jesus the Christ. It's always a blessing each and every single time that I can come before you to bring a message contained in His Word, and never do I count it as a light thing to do so. And I come before you on the day after Iran was bombed. And if you look at the lesson on the Sabbath that I did just hours before the world found out, I talked about how, you can't really hide behind God in the sense of saying, like, God bless America for the things that you do. I think that, quite frankly, this was a bad move. And what I mean by that is, it's this whole notion that Iran doesn't have a bomb, or we won't allow them to have one. I believe they already had that capability. First of all, this notion has been going on for well over roughly 30 years or so. We're not going to allow them to do this, we're not going to allow them to do that. Well, if you are one of these countries that are at odds with the United States, you have really no choice but to try to secretly or overtly acquire a nuclear weapon, because you've seen historically in the past, number one, the United States is the only country that dropped atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima at the end of World War II, showing scientific dominance. And you've seen countries to which, if they don't have a nuclear weapon, they can be attacked. For example, you look at what happened to Gaddafi in Libya, and how when Gaddafi was, I believe, encouraged by his son to get rid of his nuclear weapons. And you've seen how the United States, during the Obama administration, how they sent Al-Qaeda in and killed Gaddafi and sodomized Gaddafi and left him out on the street. So this is you don't really have a choice. But the idea that they don't already have this capability to some degree where they can be a threat, I think was quite frankly, a bad chess move, so to speak. Furthermore, the idea that because you do this, now they don't respond. And I think that either they respond or some other country responds through a false flag, and the United States is put in a position to where they have to ultimately enter war, to bomb a country, to kill its generals, to kill its scientists, and then to say we're not at war because war is not declared. Rose by any other name is still a rose. I believe it was the Secretary of State Rubio say today, well, we're not at war we're at war with Iran's nuclear program. Again, I think that is a miscalculation. Unless the country is toppled, there's going to be, I would imagine, some retaliation. Furthermore, I want to go back to what I said earlier. It is in the interest of the Israelis, and I say Israelis because these are not the people that were there originally. These are another group of people, which you're starting to see. This whole idea of these people not even being the real people of the book is actually coming out in the mainstream. When you hear Candace Owens say to a rabbi, "You're of the synagogue of Satan," or on a podcast question, just, "Are you of the Khazars?" Like, what is it? Who are? Is basically, who are you? Or when you see Tucker Carlson in a heated debate with Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz, and him saying whoever blesses Israel will be blessed, and he said, "Wait a minute." Tucker questions that and pushes back and says, "Are you saying that these people? What does that? In other words, what does that mean when you read it in Genesis? Is that referring to these people, this government, these people?" So that question of who they are, I believe, is going to come out more and more, and people will begin to realize that they are perpetrating the greatest fraud in the history of humanity in stealing the identity of the original Israelites. But nevertheless, that's secondary to a degree, because I think the United States made a grave error in this regard. Furthermore, I want to go back to that point, which I said I would go back to. Even if you want them on the ground, if you want the United States in this war, if you're one of the countries that want that, why won't you do something to encourage the United States to get into this war? And what I mean by that is you act and carry out an act of terror or whatever it is. And trust me, I don't want to see any of this happen, but I'm just looking at the situation. You, as a nation, you do a false flag. You do a false flag, blame the Iranians. It could be something as a terrorism or an assassination, and then what happens? Now you have no choice but to put boots on the ground. And now you're engaged in a war, as you were with Iraq, as you were with Afghanistan. Look at what the United States, go read the Project from the New American Century and then see what the Americans have done in these last years since the Bush administration until the present. They've toppled Syria. They stayed in Afghanistan for 20 plus years. They destroyed Iraq, killing millions of civilians. Now they bombed Iran. Okay? I think people need to pay attention, because something else that people need to pay attention to is the idea which I brought about on this last Sabbath, was that you do not see the United States in biblical prophecy. I'm going to say that again. You do not see the United States in biblical prophecy. Why? Because the United States is removed from the world stage as a they're not a superpower. If they were a superpower, they would be mentioned or alluded to in biblical prophecy. You have some that say, well, that's Babylon. Clearly, the United States is not Babylon. That's terrible doctrine. You see the powers of the East, Russia, China, and their allies, and the powers of the West, which is not the United States, but the reunification of the Roman Empire. And that's what people need to realize, because things are not going to continue as they have been. As is written, many to kill you farce, and the handwriting is on the wall in the United States will be found wanting. I want to read something here, because I think counsel is key. Counsel is key. I believe it was Johnson who was President Johnson, who, I don't want to speak to whether or not he was a corrupt president or not in this lesson, but I believe it was him who said, knowing what the right thing to do is the hardest part about being president. And I want to go to the book and see what is necessary for leadership. This is Proverbs 8 and verse 15. It reads, I'll pick it up in verse 12. It says, I, wisdom, dwell with prudence and find out knowledge of witty inventions. So this particular passage is about wisdom. Okay, it goes on to say, now wisdom is personified here. It says in verse 15, by me kings reign and princes decree justice. By me princes rule and nobles, even all the judges of the earth. See, in order to rule properly, you need wisdom. Okay, and so now if you are a true ruler, and if you are indeed wise, and if you really know, you know what you know? You know that you don't know. I'll say that again. If you really know, you understand that you don't know. There's so many things that you don't know. So if you don't know and you're in a position of leadership, what you should do is surround yourself by counselors. Ideally, you want the best people, the brightest people. You don't want to be, if you're the brightest person in the room and you're a leader, you actually need to get out of that room and find some people who know what they're doing. Proverb, because leadership doesn't mean you know everything. Leadership means I'm going to make the best decisions. And I'm going to go acquire the information from the people who know the best. This is Proverbs, the 11th chapter, and verse 14. It says, when no counsel is, the people fall, but in a multitude of counselors, there is safety. So I honestly question, what is the counsel? And I know these people, again, they spent their careers, their lives doing certain work. But I truly question, I have to question the counsel in this particular situation. What was the counsel? Do you believe that these people do not already have nuclear capability to a degree to where they could hurt the United States? I'm not talking about intercontinental ballistic missiles. I'm talking about some other form of nuclear power or some other weaponry that they have. If they were, put put the shoe on the other foot. If you were in this situation, would you not do this? If Gaddafi could, for example, could go back in time into the moment prior to giving up his nuclear weapons, and he looked and could look and see himself sodomized lying in the street, and his country toppled and people enslaved. That was the United States that did this. The United States does not have the moral high ground in this situation. Do not be fooled by anything you're seeing on the media, on Fox News, on conservatives, on neocon outlets. They do not have the moral high ground in any way, shape, or form. But this is all about power, who has it and who doesn't. It's that simple. But at the same time, I think they made a grave mistake that in the long run, when it's all said and done, they're going to look back at this situation and say, this was a misstep. I'm going to pick it up here in Proverbs, the 9th chapter here. Not Proverbs, the 9th chapter. Proverbs, the 29th chapter. Proverbs, the 29th chapter. And I want to pick up at verse 12. It says, if a ruler hearken to lies, all his servants are wicked. You know, what is that saying? Is if you listen to lies, you haven't had counselors that care about you, that have told you what you need, told you the truth. You know, I think, because he even said about Tulsi Gabbard, he said she doesn't know what she's talking about. That's his head of, intelligence. She doesn't know what she's talking about when she says they aren't doing this. As far as nuclear proliferation, she says she doesn't know what she's talking about. She's your head of intelligence. Well, number one, if she doesn't know what she's talking about, then why is she head of your intelligence? But I don't think she's right either. To be honest with you, I believe they do have this capability, and he saw that, but I think it was a misstep because they may already be in a position to clap back, so to speak. And it's not that they necessarily win, but it is that they bring the United States into war. That in other words, the United States is brought into war with Iran, no matter what. Okay, and I think that's what a misstep is. Because again, if you're Israel, who, from my understanding, I'm talking about the so-called Jews who stole the nuclear capability from the United States, if I'm not mistaken, and has, these countries have nuclear power. Would not you have nuclear power if that's the thing that is the great neutralizer? North Korea exists today, the regime that's there exists today because they have nuclear power. And I'm not saying that's a good regime. I mean, it looks extremely oppressive, but it exists. Why? Because it has nuclear power. That's why it exists. So I think that that's something that I don't think people need to. Well, I think people need to really consider what's happening here. And really, when you think about what is in the future for this country, I think people ultimately need to get a clue, okay? And need to understand the times that we are living in. And I think people need to, as always, believe the gospel, hear the gospel, and be right with the Most High, and devote their life to the Lord, because there are pressing, trying times. It is not as if this country, with all its wealth, with all its power, is going to continue as it is. Am I saying I want to see it fall? No, I live right here. I just understand that you cannot, as I mentioned in the lesson, you cannot kill 65 million babies through abortion. You cannot be the greatest distributor of pornography. You cannot have a culture of murder. You cannot have a corrupt system of justice. You cannot treat the Lord's people as you've treated them historically. You cannot do all these things, raise hell all over the world, and hide behind the idea that you are the beacon of light for the nations, and hide behind God. You are dealing with the God of this world. You cannot destroy the institution of marriage in this country. You cannot butcher young people and children through transgender surgeries and destroying the creation of the one that is created in the image and the likeness of Elohim, and expect that everything is going to be all right with you. Just as fast as you became a superpower, you can fall off the scene just as quickly, morally, because there is a principle that you reap what you sow. When the cup of iniquity reaches its brim, it doesn't matter about the power that you have. If you think it matters about the power that you have, look at Egypt, ancient Egypt, and what happened to ancient Egypt. Look at the nations in the text of the Bible, and see how no matter how strong they were, they failed. Why? Because it's not about your power. It's about what the Lord is allowing. And at a certain time, those kingdoms fail. So I don't know why people think that just because things are this way one day, that they're going to continue the next day the same way. That's just simply not the case. I want to read one other thing here. I want to go to 1 Kings. 1 Kings 12, and see an example of a king who took bad counsel. This is 1 Kings 12. 1 Kings 12 and I'm going to pick it up at verse 6. Because this is King Rehoboam. This is the son of Solomon. And he inherited a kingdom, a unified kingdom. But the people, they came to him. Just like you got a lot of people right now, they don't want war. That's one thing. People are tired of war. They were tired of war after when they went into World War I. They said never again. When World War II was happening, the United States didn't want to get into that war. And so what happened was you had Pearl Harbor. That pulled them into that war. And they knew what the Japanese had planned. They allowed it to take place so they could be pulled into that war. That's the reality. So, but then what happened after that is they filled a vacuum of becoming a superpower. Okay? And so now they still continue as a superpower along with the former Soviet Union or the Russians. Now China is emerging as a superpower. So out of the east you have China and you have Russia. But out of the west you've had the United States that built up Europe through the Marshall Plan, and they established NATO and tried to stop the spread of communism and the influence of Russia through their presence there. But that's the reunification of the Roman Empire is when Western Europe is reunified again. Their militaries are one again. Their economy is one again. You're seeing this take place. People are calling it the European Union, whatever name you want to call it. That's what's taking place. So now I want to read this here. This is 1 Kings 12, because what's happened is the United States is going to be taken off the scene. This is 1 Kings 12, and this is an example of bad counsel. It says in verse, I'm going to just pick it up at verse 1. It says, and Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel were come to Shechem to make him king. And it came to pass when Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who was yet in Egypt, heard of it, for he was fled from the presence of King Solomon, and Jeroboam dwelt in Egypt, that they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the congregation of Israel came and spake unto Rehoboam, saying, thy father made our yoke grievous, now therefore make thou the grievous service of thy father and of his yoke, his heavy yoke, which he hath put upon us lighter, and we will serve thee. So they say, hey, listen, what your father had us doing was too much. Just lighten the load a bit, and we'll serve thee. And he said unto them, depart yet for 3 days, then come again to me. And the people departed. So now he had them depart for 3 days, right? Like there was a time frame. We said, well, give me a week. Give me a week to make a decision, right? Next thing you know, breaking news: Iran is bombed by the United States. But nevertheless, and King Rehoboam consulted with the old men that stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived, and said, how do ye advise that I may answer this people? So he went to some older counsel, and they spake unto him, saying, if thou wilt be a servant unto this people this day, and wilt serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be thy servants forever. Okay, so they said, hey, listen, if you just speak life still to them, they'll be your servants forever. But he forsook the counsel of the old men, which they had given him, and consulted with the young men that were grown up with him, and which stood before him. And he said unto them, what counsel give ye that ye may answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, make the yoke which thy father did put upon us lighter? And the young men that were grown up with him spake unto him, saying, thus shalt thou speak unto this people that spake unto thee, saying, thy father made our yoke heavy, but thou shalt make it lighter unto us. Thus shalt thou say unto them, my little finger shall be thicker than my father's loins. And that was a mistake. So it says, and now whereas my father did lade you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father hath chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. That was not wise. He should have not told, even if that was his intent, that was not wise to tell those people that. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the third day, as the king had appointed, saying, come to me again the third day. And the king answered the people roughly, and forsook the old man's counsel that they gave him, and spake to them after the counsel of the young men, saying, my father made out your yoke heavy, and I will add to your yoke. My father also chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. That was not wise. Wherefore the king hearkened not unto the people, for the cause was from the Lord, that he might perform. Notice what it said here. Wherefore the king hearkened not unto the people, for the cause was from the Lord, that he might perform his saying, which the Lord spake by Ahiah the Shilonite unto Jeroboam the son of Nebat. In other words, that the kingdom would be split. Why? Because it came out, that ultimately came out because of sin, but that bad counsel was the thing that led to that. Just like when you read about Ahab and the lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets that encouraged him to go up to Ramoth Gilead, and Micaiah, who was speaking to the Lord, told him, I saw Israel as sheep with no shepherd. And what happened when Ahab went up there? He went up there and got killed. And Jehoshaphat almost got killed because he was in affinity with him in that particular endeavor to take Ramoth Gilead. Listen to me. America is not in any moral position to say who and who can't have a weapon. They're not in a moral position to lead the nations of the world in morality. This country is not moral. What it is powerful. And your power is not greater than the power of the Most High. And what this country needs is a reformation of values. What it needs is a reformation of values, of culture. It has a degenerate culture, and that breeds iniquity and sin. And you cannot continue as a country unless you address that. That's what you need to do as a country. You need to address that. You having this power, you taking solace and might like Nebuchadnezzar in the sense of, look at what I've done. I got this great power. No other country can do this. Look at all the might we have. Your hand's too short to box with the Most High. You ain't got that kind of power. So I don't know why you think you can continue on the course you've been on and think that everything is going to be okay. Now that's to the government. I don't understand why the government, well, I do, people don't know, they don't have spiritual understanding. Why the officials believe that, and why individuals believe that. That's, what's going on, and supporting people in unjust, immoral activities in the long run is never good for a country. Countries like empires, they fall. And it's because of their morality. The Lord is the one that sets up these countries to have power, and He's the one that takes them out of power. Mark my words. I'm not just talking. Mark my words. So this is not the time. This is not the time to be immoral. It really isn't. It's never the time to do that, but people just need to take heed to what's going on. And with that, brothers and sisters, it's always my prayer that you will edify.
You know who made it.